do not hate the United States, but by opportunism, by patriotism. I had to help the North Vietnamese, and I got their promise to respect always Cambodia as an independent state, a neutral state, non-aligned state, without any interference in our internal affairs from Vietnam.
More and more Cambodians, however, were disenchanted by Sihanouk's breach with America. The loss of greenback dollars was taking its toll. The army was bigger, students were and Sihanouk's stifling control rankled the urban classes. To appease the army and his right-wing critics, Sihanouk appointed General Lon Nol to head a new, more conservative government. Lon Nol's partner was a prince named Siri Matak, who came from a branch of the royal family which the French had snubbed when Sihanouk was given the throne. While Sihanouk knew he could bluff Lon Nol, he was not so sure of Siri Matak. Lon Nol himself and others high up were lining their pockets by trucking supplies for the Viet Cong. But despite the corruption, they despised the Viet Cong presence. They yearned for the halcyon days of American spending, before Sihanouk had cut off relations. By the late 1960s, Sihanouk had second thoughts. Alarmed by the discontent, he put out feelers to restore relations with Washington. President Nixon, however, had schemes of his own. In March 1969, Operation Breakfast began. The Americans launched a secret campaign of bombing to strike at the communist sanctuaries in Cambodia. Sihanouk would never admit that he actually approved of America's bombing, but instead of protesting, Sihanouk was uncharacteristically silent. In January 1970, the prince took leave from his mounting problems at home. He left Phnom Penh to fly to France. There he wanted rest and medical attention before going on to Moscow and Peking to make urgent appeals for economic aid. He would also issue a warning to the communist leaders.
I plan to talk to Moscow and Peking and to say to them that they should advise their allies, the Viet Cong, the Viet Minh, to avoid, to refrain themselves from interfering in the affairs of the Cambodian, because Cambodia will not be willing to be communized, and they will meet with strong resistance of the Cambodian people if they want to communize us.
Protest marches were staged in Phnom Penh during Sihanouk's absence. Although Cambodia's troubles were economic, Lon Nol and Siri Matak were turning the frustrations into popular anger against the communist Vietnamese. By attacking the Viet Cong presence, they were attacking Sihanouk's policies, and that was only a step from attacking the master himself.
The Cambodian people reacted by demanding that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese authorities remove their bases from Cambodia. Popular anger grew. There were large demonstrations outside the National Assembly demanding the removal of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese bases. Norodom Sihanouk, faithful to his pro-communist political beliefs, condemned the demonstrators and defended the cause of the communists. In this, he was betraying his country and the Cambodian people.
Do you feel that Americans, say the CIA, has helped to stir up this trouble in Cambodia, or are your people genuinely against the Viet Cong interference there?
Everything is possible, but I do not want to accuse the United States. I have not any proof about it, but I can say that some officers in our army and many deputies and many members of the government in Phnom Penh, they want to be your ally in order to have dollars, your dollars. They don't think about the destiny and the fate of our homeland. They don't mind about it. They are more patriots for dollars than for Cambodia.
Instead of returning to Cambodia, Sihanouk flew on to Moscow and Peking. Perhaps he was confident of returning later with promises of new economic aid. But within a week, the revolt had gone too far, and Sihanouk had lost any chance to regain control.
On March 18, 1970, the National Assembly and the Council of the Kingdom met and voted unanimously to withdraw their confidence in Prince Norodom Sihanouk. Thus, on March 18, 1970, Prince Norodom Sihanouk was no longer the chief of state of Cambodia.
Mais nous notons une chose, la première chose, parce que nous faisons.
Ambition. Mr. Lomnol, my cousin Sarimata, they were guided by their personal ambitions. They had to betray Sihanouk in order to be at the top of Cambodia. You know, Lomnol, it was a mystical. We spoke about the predictions, and according to the most famous astrologers in Cambodia in the years, so Lomnol had to become one head of state and two, the savior of Buddhism against the threat of communism. And so the interpretation by the one I trust so much, Lomnol, and my cousin Sarimata, was this. So Lomnol must be head of state, not Sihanouk. Sihanouk has to disappear. And two, Sihanouk is an accomplice of the communists.
But was that true? Did you ever feel you were an accomplice?
Accomplice...
or used by the communists?
No. You know, I was conscious that communism was not good, but, you know, I had to be realistic.
When Sihanouk arrived in Peking, he learned the news of his overthrow from his friends, the Chinese leaders. They urged the prince to stay in exile in China and to form a coalition with the communists against Lomnol and his American backers.
I think Sihanouk's biggest mistake was in simply leaving the country. As long as he was there, he was in pretty good control of things.
The speaker is Alan Dawson, an author and journalist who writes on Indochina.
I think the people who ousted him simply made a miscalculation. I think they wanted to teach him a lesson. But I don't think even the rightest of the right-wing people who were involved in that ever conceived of a day in Cambodia without Sihanouk in power. And a little later, they had a trial that convicted him of high treason in his absence and sentenced him to death in absentia. And at that point, the miscalculation became a severe miscalculation, and Sihanouk could no longer return to the country in any kind of safety. But I think up to that point, he probably could have.
In the drama of March 1970, students, soldiers and agitators stirred up a frenzy of racial hatred against the Vietnamese. The victims were not Viet Cong. They were terrified civilians from Vietnamese families settled in Cambodia for several generations. Far from stopping the bloodletting,